some more ideas around and some more practical things that we can be doing. I thought that was very good, because what I think it brings home to us is this bit about the internationalism of these left movements, you know, and the feeling. I mean, I've been around a long time, and sometimes you feel you're battling on your own. Then after, when something like this happens, you realise you haven't been battling on your own, you know. There has been that movement around you, and that's great. That's a great feeling of support. I'm hoping, Liam, that you've managed to satisfy Fiona Man now, and I'm going to ask Liam Cooper, who until yesterday, as I said earlier on, was actually in Greece, and he saw what was happening. He saw the Syriza victory, and he was able to celebrate it with them, and he's going to talk us through some of the very, very real aspects of what that has meant in Greece. So Liam, it's over to you now.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. As you were saying, I have just come back from Athens. It really meant a lot to me to be there and witness what is certainly the first victory for the left that's happened in my lifetime, and it was a very exciting thing to be a part of. And I'm a member of Left Unity in South London. I went with a delegation of other Left Unity colleagues, and it's certainly very important to us, as Syriza has always been a very inspiring example of the kind of radical alternative to social democracy, or at least its contemporary neoliberal form that we want to build. And I'm going to talk about my experience in Athens. There were two things that I really want to talk about. On Saturday, I visited several of the solidarity centres that have emerged in Greece over the last couple of years as a result of the retreat of the state from the provision of welfare and health education and such. There's been a spontaneous development of social clinics, food distribution centres, this kind of thing. So I'll talk a bit about that, about the kind of things I witnessed and things like that. And then obviously, on Sunday there was the election itself, so I'm going to speak a bit about that and try to make some connection between the two at the end. So the solidarity centres really grew out of the movement of the squares in 2011, the kind of development of popular assemblies in public spaces that happened in 2007 as a result of the social consequences of the memorandum, and they were very much inspired by ideas of kind of direct democracy, grassroots organising. And obviously Syriza was able to involve itself in that in a very positive way. By September 2012, there were between 180 and 200 kind of self-organising structures in Greece, and growing out of those, their assemblies, they had formed more kind of practical forms of solidarity around some areas around food, collecting food and distributing it in the community, some social clinics, which I visited one in Athens, some education centres, some legal centres which give people advice around debt and various other issues, and also there's been a flourishing of workers' cooperatives and workers' control. One prominent example of that is the Vioni factory in Thessaloniki, which was bankrupted by its owners and continued.
Could you speak up a bit?
Sorry, I'm not a very experienced public speaker. I hope people have been able to hear what most of I've been saying. Yes, sorry, I was talking about the emergence of solidarity networks in Greece as a result of the memorandum, and this really grew out of the movements of the squares and its organised along a number of different areas of Greek society. The two examples that I witnessed were food, although they also did lots of other things, but their main emphasis was the distribution of food, people can no longer afford food, and health in the form of a social clinic in a very working class suburb of Athens. So the first centre I'm talking about they called it the Solidarity Train because it was in Argi Anari, and it was right next to a railway, and it's a very deprived area of Athens. It has a diminished industrial base and very high levels of unemployment, lots of people struggling with personal debt, particularly around mortgages, loans and housing. People obviously on very low incomes with the collapse of wages over the last few years. And so what happened is largely working class women, as the solidarity movements have generally been dominated by women, as well as other a minority of men, but largely women. That it began around the collection and distribution of food. So they would set up a stall outside supermarkets asking for donations, which they would then distribute amongst the community. And they started out with quite large quantities of food being donated. And as the crisis deepened, people became less and less able to donate. And that's where the organisation Solidarity for All kind of came in. And that is an organisation which has its roots in a solidarity fund established by Syriza, and but also in organisational terms it has a certain autonomy, and some of the people I spoke to were very supportive of Syriza, others had a different political affiliations, but certainly Syriza has played an important role in allowing these movements to flourish and in facilitating the work that they've been doing. So this group, the Solidarity Train, been helping about 180 families in the area, so having a real impact on the local community. They've retained the kind of principles of direct democracy from the movement of the squares, and all decision making is done on the basis of these assemblies involving both the volunteers who provide the food and people who depend on them, and there's a real attempt to get people involved proactively. So rather than it being simply a form of charity, it's meant to be organisational, meant to be about politicising people. And the literature that they showed me is very political and focuses on the fact that the memorandum is causing poverty that necessitates the work that they're doing. And they've managed to, they're now expanding into different areas. So it's not purely around food now. There's also cultural activities, language lessons, and all sorts. So it's a very vibrant organisation. And so the Solidarity for All coordinator who took me there then took me to a social clinic, which is in Nea Philadelphia, also a very working class area of Athens, and again a very left-wing area of Athens. And it was started by several qualified doctors in September 2014. It's run on a similar basis as the Solidarity Train. There's a kind of democratic involvement of people who are reliant on the service, as well as people who are volunteers and are providing it. It was very eye-opening talking to them as they explained the level of the collapse of healthcare in Greece, and some examples of that, the life expectancy is lower by about 2 to 3 years since the crisis began, mainly due to large rises in infant mortality. They spoke a lot about the privatisation of primary care and the funding crisis for what remains the state healthcare system. The fact that the cuts being implemented horizontally across the service, because there's not a kind of attempt at waste minimisation. It's a very kind of absolute cut in healthcare funding. But it's not just about that, it's also the collapse in personal hygiene, collapse in housing provision. All these things are interrelated, and they all lead to the kind of healthcare problems that are now very common in Greece. And there's, again, it goes back to the issue of personal debt. Lots of people are uninsured, and lots of people have owed debt to health insurance providers, which they, even if they accrue debt in a period of unemployment and then find work, it's still very difficult for them to get to a point in which they can become insured again, because the debt is still there. So they treat 15 people a day, and that they were very keen to emphasise that it isn't just about providing relief, it's also about organising people and explaining to people that this is the kind of service that the state should be providing, and that it's austerity that is preventing that. It's the memorandum. So it was, it was very inspiring seeing the kind of work that they're doing. And it's interesting, solidarity for all, and linked with Syriza. As I say, Syriza is funding this organisation and is doing very important work in facilitating it. Where it's interesting, some people in Solidarity for All are also slightly critical that Syriza, to a certain extent, is at arm's length from it, and it provides this funding that is, in a way, subcontracting its kind of grassroots organising. That's certainly how some people see it. So there's an interesting debate there. And that moves me on to Syriza election. Obviously, it was an incredibly exciting experience. We were able to spend some time in Syriza offices and talk to various politicians, party activists, and see some of the exit polls coming in from there. But there was also an election tent in the centre of Athens, and just a very short walk from the Greek Parliament. And I was able to be there when the first exit poll of the evening was announced, which put Syriza on in the lead and with 39% of the vote. And it was a tremendous kind of outpouring of emotion from people. And very international, a real sense of international solidarity. There was several comments from Podemos, from Die Linke, from Left Bloc, Portugal, there's a variety of, and also the Italian left were very strongly represented. So yes, Kate already talked about some of the kind of challenges that Syriza are going to face. I'll go into some of that as well. One thing we did get a sense of, being there and being in their offices and being in their election tents and talking to people, was that it's a party that's now getting 30% of the vote, but it still has the structures and kind of activist base of the party of 5%. Obviously it's had a very rapid growth in its electoral support, and so that presents a challenge for driving through this programme, which obviously will face enormous opposition within Europe. Stathis Kouvelakis, when we speak, who's on the leadership committee at Syriza, and who's also part of the left platform grouping within Syriza. he spoke of the danger of the party being swallowed, the party was still quite small, being swallowed by the state. Something that can happen when left parties take government and suddenly their cadre is needed for different state positions, and so there's a danger of that. And I suppose that's also linked to the question of the state and the fact that Syriza is, well, it's inheriting this state machine which is not sympathetic to its politics, and particularly the Greek police. I'm sure many people read there's a statistic that was widely circulated that 50% or so of Greek police have sported Golden Dawn. And if we look at the history of left-wing governments in Latin America and such, obviously there's real danger with the repressive apparatus of the state undermining the popular will. There's obviously a long history of that happening. And I suppose the other danger is of co-optation if Syriza is pressured to compromise on its demands, then that would be a crushing blow for the whole of the Greek left, I think, and I think the whole of the European left, as obviously this has been a tremendous source of optimism for all of us. But I'm reasonably optimistic that isn't going to happen. Certainly everything that's been said so far by CPLAS and others is that they are implementing the Thessaloniki programme, and the Thessaloniki programme is, I'm very positive about it. I think it's rooted in the immediate needs of Greek workers. It involves restoring wages to 2010 levels. It involves restoring electricity to those who've had it cut off. And obviously the issues around debt relief that previous speakers have mentioned. So there is likely to be a very real confrontation, I think, as what's coming from representatives of the ECB and such is that further assistance programs will only come under the Eurozone's rules, and there is an insistence on the point of continuing austerity in Greece, and so there is going to be a very, as I say, a very real confrontation, and it's a confrontation between Syriza and the Troika. It's also a confrontation within Greek society and a conflict within the Greek state, and so all of this. So that's again. So then that's where the social movements become very important, and the burgeoning kind of solidarity networks and such become very important. What I would, to kind of strike a more optimistic note, what I certainly hope to see happening is that as Syriza implements its programme, the movements grow in confidence and in resources, and as some of the restrictions have been placed on union organising lifted, the Greek working class is able to exercise more of its power, and so then we could see a process of radicalisation as social movements grow in confidence and are able to exert more pressure on the Greek government. So there's obviously tremendous dangers, and I forgot to mention the independent Greeks. Obviously, Syriza fell slightly short of the majority, and the KKE has had a very sectarian attitude towards Syriza for a very long time, and is unwilling to form a coalition. So there's now this coalition with the independent Greeks. They're anti-memorandum, but they're certainly not they're certainly a right-wing organisation with very anti-immigration politics, which obviously Syriza doesn't share. So that's a danger as well. But certainly this is a profoundly important moment, and as I say, I think with the radicalism of some of Syriza's proposals and the kind of radicalisation and growth of social movements, there is potential for a real social transformation in Greece, and it's something obviously I think we need to reproduce here, and it's been very inspirational for me to witness it, as I'm sure it has been for all of you to read about it and follow it. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam, very much, and I think that outlines the positives, but also some of the risks that are involved in the situation, which we're all aware of, but brings it graphically home to us from Liam's experience out there. A lot of it, sadly, sounds so familiar, doesn't it? I mean, the food banks that we have here, personal debt. We know, for instance, that in Wales, the bedroom tax, the big federal bedroom tax in Wales in particular, has been the increase in personal debt, because people can't move from their homes. They've no other home, there aren't the houses here for them to move to. So it's increased personal debt enormously, you know. And as Liam said at the end, we hope to replicate what has happened in Greece here in Britain. It's going to be a struggle, but, you know, one must remain optimistic.